All right. Okay, everybody. Welcome to this month's Firefighter Book Club. We are hanging out with Chase Sargent, the author of Buddy the Boss. And just want to remind everybody the next couple of books that we're doing. Next month for November, it's actually going to be pretty quick here. We're meeting on November 10th. Remember, we're doing Murphy's book, the Firehouse Mentor. So just talked to Murphy the other day. He's excited, prepared to come on and do that. And then for December, we are doing The Game by Rennick Sampson. I don't have any of those books to show you because I just went in our bookstore and they're all sold out. So I just talked to Rennick last week to order 20 more. This is the book that I usually give to all my rookies for probation that are on probation for Christmas. I give books to everybody for Christmas, but if they're on probation, I always give them The Game, kind of getting them how to go through probation and not screw it up. So I'm trying to talk Rennick into doing another book called The Pregame, like how to get hired. But he's busy. He just got promoted to captain, so he's still trying to figure out that life right now too. Started putting together the 2022 book club list, and excited to say we got John Norman coming on. He's going to do his book, his new book, with the Giants. So I got him looked in there for the book club. And I also talked to Rick Lasky for Pride and Ownership. He's going to come on and do that. Richard Gasaway is going to do one of his situational awareness books. So already kind of lining up 2022 to be some awesome people on here to hang out. So let's turn it over to Chase and let's wrap up some of the stuff as far as his book, Buddy the Boss. Just came out with the second edition this last year, right? Or 2019?
God, I don't remember. I think 2019, 2020, something like that. It's a lot of work, as you know, as Guy knows.
Well, let's talk about that real quick, because one of the things I always talk about with this book club is it's also like for authors or people looking to write a book. How long did it take you to actually put all of the stuff down on paper for Buddy the Boss?
Collectively, the first edition took me about 2 years to put it all together, and then of course the editorial process and them taking all the cuss words out and, all that stuff. And then you got to figure out the flow. What do you want to talk about and what kind of chapters do you want to put in and how in depth is each chapter, and, how do you stack the chapters so one chapter flows to the next chapter and sort of builds on each other. So for me, it was about a 2-year process, and then rewriting, it was about a year process because for two reasons. Number one, we wanted to edit it and make it a little bit better than it was. And I was fortunate that Margaret, my wife, is a English lit major. So she was able to really refine that book. And then, of course, the editorial staff at Clarion and Fire Engineering Books did a phenomenal job. But the other thing is that they wanted me to add about 6 or 8 chapters, because when you rewrite the book, there's a certain percentage, I think it's 20 or 25%, they want 20 or 25% new material. So I had to sit down and write 6 or 8 new chapters, which were good. They were challenging for me, and it helped me get educated, because teaching is learning twice, and then when you're writing, you're learning because you're doing the research and digging back in your memories and stuff. So I would encourage anybody who has some background and has a vision to do it. I mean, don't let anybody tell you anything that can't be done. Don't ever let anybody who's done nothing tell you how to do anything.
So what was some of the stuff that you added in for the new edition?
Let's see, we added a chapter on budget, how the budget works, so that people understand how things happen. We added an EMS chapter that sort of outlined, with the help of John Sinclair out of Washington State and with the help of Mary Beth Mikos and some other folks at iChiefs and IAFF, to sort of look at what the trends were. Trying to think what else we added in there. Oh, we added a chapter on culture, how culture can kill. I'd have to go back and look. I forget what the other chapters were, but it was challenging, especially the EMS chapter, because EMS is changing rapidly, and we looked at some of the Medicare, Medicaid things associated with that, and it's just silly the way we do business.
Well, I remember last time we were hanging out, you were talking about, like, if you look at the previous edition, you looked at like DUI was like the big thing, and now you're saying social media is the new DUI for firefighters.
It is, I mean, it used to be, and Guy, and I know some of us have been around long enough that, making no excuses, but if you were a firefighter in the 70s and even early 80s and you got pulled or you put your car in a ditch and you got out a little tipsy and the cops came up, they go, "Oh, you're a firefighter. We'll get in the car. We'll take you home," But now that's really a fatal offense. I mean, you're going to lose your job over that offense. But now social media, I mean, I put it on the Buddy the Boss website. The things that go on, I mean, everything's discoverable. And if you're posting things that are inappropriate, whether they're politically inappropriate, and you're entitled, it's First Amendment, I get that. But if you're posting racially charged items or discriminatory items or threatening, constitutional officers or posting inappropriate jokes. I mean, we had a retired firefighter here who ran for the school board, got elected, and 3 days after being elected, somebody, how it is, divulged all this stuff, and he ended up having to resign. Social media is the devil. It really is. And I never had it. I came home and I got it, unfortunately, to put up Buddy the Boss, and that required a personal account. And, it's allowed me to keep in contact with a lot of old friends that I had not seen in a long time. But you got to be really careful about it's all discoverable. Everything is discoverable. And, what we don't seem to understand, and I think we're getting is they live among us. I mean, we have members, not necessarily in your organization or mine, but in the fire service and the police service and law enforcement and public safety. We have the Boogaloo Boys. We have QAnon. We have, Black Panthers. We have, I mean, I could give you a whole list. We've got white supremacists. They exist among us. They're small quantities, but they're there. And, you get into some of those chat rooms and start posting stuff, and you're going to be in trouble. Sexual orientation, discriminatory, racial, far right, far left kind of stuff. It could get you into a bind, not just with your bosses, but with your politicians. And then if you start doing that on city or county computers, you're done.
Right. Well, and that brings us to one thing you talk about, right? Avoid the toilet flush.
Yeah, we all got a lot going on, especially company officers. They got, they're the designated adult in the house, and they're trying to keep all the kittens in the box every single day. And when we teach about how, one of the things that I do when I teach is I want to teach them how the political system works, because they have to understand how to communicate that and why stuff happens externally. As Covey would say, you got a circle of concern and a circle of influence and a circle of concern, and your circle of concern is always much wider. And you need to know why stuff happens. And when something goes wrong, you've got the elected officials who sort of tell us what they want, but it's all fuzzy stuff. I want good schools, I want good fire department, I want a good EMS, I want good parks and rec, but they don't put any meat on it. It's just a skeleton. They don't have to, because they don't really have the intelligence and or the skills to do that. And then they hire managers, fire chief, police chief, EMS chief, director of forestry, to implement that thing by creating a strategic plan that says, this is how we're going to do what you ask us to do. And then there's us. There's the operations or the worker bees who go out and do it and convert that strategic plan, that fuzzy into the strategic plan, into actions every single day. Well, there's supposed to be feedback loop about what's working up and down. And ultimately, at the bottom of that, everything's aligned to take care of the customer, to take care of, as Bruno would say, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But unfortunately, what happens is when we make a mistake, which isn't very often, but when we piss the customer off, the feedback loop doesn't come to us. It goes straight up to the political system, and then the toilet flushes. And then, regardless of left coast, right coast, hot on the left, cold on the right, shit don't float uphill, and it flushes. And when it does, now we, as officers in all the chain of command, have to take our valuable time from doing stuff that's important to answer these complaints. At least in my opinion, 90% plus are unfounded. I mean, I got to a point where I would tell customers when I was division chief, put it in writing. If you don't call me up and complain about my people, because I'm not going to go chew on somebody or investigate something if you're not willing to put it in writing. If you're just going to file a verbal complaint, I'm not investigating it. You got to put it in writing, because we have to have somebody that we can go back to it's unfair to our members to just have a one-sided conversation about that. So whatever you do, avoid the toilet flush every single day. And, there's a variety of ways to do that, but just don't add extra work for yourself by having a customer get pissed off and having the toilet flush through your chain of command, and it always ends up on your lap, always.
Right. Well, and in the book, for me, I actually compare it to keeping the fire out of the attic, right, with my employee fire stuff. I don't want it above me, right? Because when it gets above me, I can't see it, I can't control it, and that's the hard part. So yeah, trying to keep it out of the chief's lap is definitely a good thing for you.
Yeah, if you can solve it, you always solve it at the lowest level. And unfortunately, when the customer gets involved, it doesn't typically come back at the lowest level. It absolutely goes to the highest level. And as you said, then the ceiling comes down on you and you go, oh crap, fire bug,
Well, I don't have the ceiling coming down above me in the book, but now I'm going to add that. So there you
Okay,
go.
good. I'm glad I could improve.
One of the things right at the beginning of the book that I just love, and I'm sure you can add on to it, but you said your first day as a lieutenant, going in there, the previous lieutenant left you a matchbook with the one match.
I was a product. I don't say victim because there are no such things. I was a product of the same sort of educational system as officers that most of us fell into. They spent 22 weeks putting me through recruit school, testing me, came out for a year probation, and then I was allowed to officially join the family. But when I got promoted, because I was, I always wanted to be an officer, one day they walked in and shook my hand and pinned a lieutenant's badge on me, saying, congratulations, you're lieutenant. Next shift, you're going to Company 1. And I'm like, I had no training. And, the one thing I stress is that Bruno Senior, I love that, I love Alan. We spent many a day and night together. He taught us all so much. But one of the things he said is if you follow ugly kids home, you're going to find ugly parents. And I was fortunate in that I did not work for ugly parents. I had great leaders who had work ethic and values and were tactically sound and didn't keep a pint of whiskey in his hard sleeve, or required us to work for our money. But unfortunately, the first time I got assigned to a company, it was a small company, single piece with 3 people, old station, a lot of potential, but limited runs. I walked into somebody who had raised ugly kids for the most part. And, I walked in and there was a matchbook, and I opened it up and it was one match that said, hey, rookie, set the world on fire. And when this goes out, stop. And I'm like, what does this mean? What magic is this? And it progressed from there, and I won't beat you up with all the old stories, but it really is. If you follow ugly kids home, you're going to find ugly parents. And any of us, when we get first promoted, if we're blessed enough to step into a place that didn't have ugly parents, we're good. But if we step into a place that had ugly parents and then ugly kids, now you're going to get pushed back. Now you got to start changing the culture of that company. And that's tough for somebody who has no officer training at all and thinks they're the best in the world. And I found out I was neither.
Well, you actually cite Bruno in there a couple times in your book, and like one of the things right at the beginning when you're talking about the time management model and where chiefs are putting their time versus where we're putting our time, and I think that sometimes the disconnect between the floor personnel and what's going on in management is we just don't know what they're doing in their office over there. And you talked about Bruno in there as a sighting. If you see a division chief or a fire chief at your scene or like even in a firehouse, it's kind of like Bigfoot. It should be a rare occasion. And sometimes we sit around the kitchen table like, how come we don't see them out here more often? Well, it's a complete disconnect.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't have to be. Again, that goes back to education. It goes back to teaching people from day one what their expectation is and what the organizational expectation is and where you layer. I agree 100% with you. So when I made division chief, I was the special operations chief, but I also had citywide tour commander on B shift. So you're talking 21 stations, multiple piece companies, 325 square miles. And I made a decision that I was going to go see every single company and what I was going to do was sit down with them just say, hey, what are your expectations of me? What are my expectations of you? And of course, doing my battalions, I had 5 battalions, it's easy. I get them all together. But doing companies, that's a whole different thing, So I made 3 decisions. One, I was going to do them in the evening because I didn't want to disrupt their daily routine. 2, I was going to try to make it informal. And 3, I was really wanted to go find out what their concerns were overall, both with operational stuff and administrative stuff, but also what were their expectations of me as their new division chief. And I'm telling you what, Jess, the first 3 stations I walked into, their first question was, what happened? Well, what went wrong? Why are you here? And I'm like, no, nothing's happened. I'm just here to, and they're like, no, you're lying. You're lying. You're being economically true. There's some shit going on here, and we don't, and you're just sneaking in here. And finally, telephone, telegraph, firefighter. Eventually, the word got out that I was visiting, and that I wasn't coming in, because the only time they saw anybody of that rank was when something went to shit, and somebody was coming in to talk to them, and it shouldn't be like that. And and I realized that when you get to that different level, your job changes, and your time management, and it's hard. And if you're going to go see stations, you're going to have to make a real effort to do it. And you're exactly right. And we need to educate our people, not just so that they know what those job responsibilities are, but I think also, if Jesse or Guy or Chase want to promote, we got to realize that when we promote, our job description, our job tasks, where we spend our time is going to change. And if we don't like that and we don't want to do it, we probably shouldn't promote, because then what we do is we end up micromanaging. We end up falling back into a comfort zone where we're trying to do somebody else's job that we don't need to do their job for them if we trust them. And if we don't trust them, we should be sitting them down and getting that squared away right away. So that's a really good point. You should have seen the looks on their face. They're like, oh shit, what happened?
Well, it's funny when you actually start talking about, like, hey, you have to trust them, you have to empower them. You go back to that, you brought up Covey's, circle of concern and circle of influence. I've been a captain for 15 years now, and I can tell you my circle of concern keeps getting smaller, even though my circle of influence keeps getting bigger. It's, hey, I can influence a lot, but at the same time, a lot of that stuff doesn't matter. When it all comes down to it, I'm going out, I'm taking care of Mrs. Smith, running calls, training for those calls, physical fitness. The guys get a nap in every once in a while. We're good. A lot of the other stuff, like I don't even see it as part of my circle of concern anymore. It makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, and sometimes you got to let things go. And unfortunately, that circle of influence and circle of concern is sort of like throwing a stone in a pond with the rings that go out. The higher you get up, the more influence you have, but your concern gets bigger. And it doesn't matter. You can end up to be the fire commissioner, and it doesn't matter. Your circle of concern is still going to be this big, even though your influence is bigger. It's like that, throwing that stone in the water and the rings just go out, but yeah. You're smart because you're relieving yourself from some stress by saying, there's some things I can control and some things I can, and I'm going to be educated enough to explain to the members of my team and my organization why shit happens. But I'm going to be at least cognizant of what I'm not going to spend nights tossing and turning over things that I just can't fix unless I want to get into a different position and fix it. I think that's good mental health.
Yeah. Well, and you get into the next chapter with that too, is when you're going out and you're visiting your people, you're talking about knowing your people and knowing yourself, right? You got to.
Yeah. Everybody, everybody thinks they got their Viking helmet on and the sun in their face and, in the greatest sense like sliced cheese. And as it turns out, that's absolutely not true. I use the old acronym or the old saying. I say, like, look, if you got a crew and you go on vacation, do you think your crew is going to continue to get stuff done? And the answer is yeah. But if your whole crew takes vacation and you're left by yourself, are you going to get things done? So who ends up being the most important people on that organizational ladder? And one of the hardest things I ever did was do if you really want to know how you're doing, do a down evaluation, not an up evaluation. Don't have your supervisor evaluate. Have your people that work with you and work for you supervise you. From the mouth of babes come wisdom. And they will tell you, and sometimes it will hurt, but I'll tell you what, it's better to get hurt one time, get your ego hurt, and than it is to continue those types of behaviors and not fix them. And doing those down evaluations or having my people evaluate me was real eye opener. And I was upset on a couple of them. I was hurt. I was angry. But then once I, was able to sit down and actually look at it, it improved me. It made me not repeat those same disruptive or dysfunctional behaviors that I had before. And it made me less of an ugly parent.
Well, and the other thing that you talk about in the book is, the DISC profile or Myers-Briggs and doing those types of things on yourself. And you figured out, which we all know, you're a high D when you do the DISC profile.
Like off the scale.
But how does that actually help you with like learning about yourself to make you a better company officer, leader, chief officer?
Yeah, I mean, I think the humanistic tendency for all of us is, your problem is you're not more like me. If you were more like me, everything would be okay. Well, the reality is, if you were more like me, one of two things would happen. We'd both be in jail, or we'd be rolling around on the floor beating each other. Yeah, exactly, guy. And so I think that the thing that we don't teach is we need our officers at all levels to be talent scouts, because what you find out in the DISC profile is crazy. I don't even know how they figured that stuff out, but if you've ever done it, the results of it, people's eyes just wide open. It's a personality profile, and basically what it tells you is these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses, and in order to compensate for what you lack or fix your overcompensation by using your strengths all the time, you need these kinds of people to surround you. And so, the saying that I use in the book is, stop trying to stuff in what was left out. It's hard enough trying to draw out what was left in. Be a talent scout and find out what niche your folks have, and manipulate it for the good, grow it, and use it for the good of that shift. I mean, if you got a great IT person or a great trainer or a great pump operator or a great, truck operator, send a truck operator to school so they get their high school education and they can move to an engine. But, that's okay. But, you got to talent scout those people. And that is really a layered approach. It starts at the company. But, how many of us, when we first joined, had our company officers sit us down for 15 minutes and go, what are your goals in this organization? What do you want to do? Where do you want to be? You want to be a firefighter your whole life? Do you want to be in training? Do you want to be a chief of a department one day? Do you want to be in investigations? Do you want to go on a truck or a squad? Or do you want to be a paramedic? What do you want to do? Because if I don't ask those questions, how am I able as a parent, which is what we are, to help you get there? You would do it for your kids. You would say, what type of schools you want to go to? Where you want to go to college? What type of trades? What type of sports do you want to play? And if I don't ask those questions, how can I help the members of my organization in my shift attain their goals? Because it's about their goals. It's not about my goals. It's about their goals. And so, I mean, you're exactly right. If you know yourself and you know your people, you're going to be better off to help them progress, because 25 years, you're going to be gone and they're still going to be there, you got to build a strong, deep bench. There's an old story about in the 1930s of a general manager that sent his scout out for the Chicago Cubs, and the scout came back and told the manager, he goes, hey, I found this pitcher. He threw against 20 hitters and nobody could hit him except one guy. One guy hit him all fouls, and the manager said, hire the hitter. We're looking for hitters. That's talent scouting, So be a talent scout, raise the kids, and raise yourself too, and don't be afraid to take criticism from the kids, because they don't pay attention to what you say, but they watch every single thing you do.
Right.
You can't drive down the road like our parents used to do in the old Ford station wagon with us facing backwards with no seatbelt on, drink in their hand, a cigarette going, let me tell you something, don't drink and drive and never smoke. Oh, and wear your seatbelt.
Well, and you talked about, well, everybody's not like me. Well, that there's nobody like you, first and foremost. And I have offered you bail money multiple times if you need it. So I think we got that covered.
I think we got that covered. And I carry my medical paperwork with me to show I was meconium aspirate. So things that roll off my mouth are medically induced, not viciously induced.
So one of the things you also talk about is leading the B team, which was probably very difficult because you're a high D, right? But your B team players, where do you go with that? You came up with kind of a grading system too.
So, every organization has A, B, C, D, and not too many F players, because if we're smart, we get rid of the F players. So the A players are the high functioners, that will do anything for you. Everybody wants them. The unfortunate thing about the A player is they're so good at what they do, is that we as an organization or as a leader or as a company officer, but they're always the go-to. If we want something done, we're going to go see Jesse. We're going to go see Guy. That's who we're going to get the project to. The problem is that's all good and well, but they need a break too. And we just burn them in. They're like a candle. We burn them up. So then we got the B players. The B players are great operators. They're great trainers, and everybody wants them. And then you got C players. There's nothing wrong with a C player, but as James O'Page said, he said, in municipal government, minimum qualifications become maximum expectations. So, if I'm a C player, if I want to show up at the right place at the right time, the right uniform, never cause any problems, just do the minimum to get by, not dork things up, but not excel, not offer to do anything, and then go home and run my lawn business or my carpentry business, because that's what I really want to do, because the fire service is my part-time job. There's no real way financially to motivate those people. Now, what you can do is you can talent scout them and give them the opportunity to let their skills within your company or your battalion shine. And that moves them up to a B level for a while. And then they can come back down to the C level. But, there's nothing wrong with C players, but you don't want a whole shift of them. You just don't want a whole shift of minimum doers. Then you got your D players. Those are the folks who, they sit the line and then they fall below the line, and then they come back up and they fall below the line. And they come back and they fall below. And those are problem children, because you got to fix that or you got to fire it. And, that's a whole nother thing. But, so unfortunately, organizationally, what happens is nobody wants to give up an A or a B player. Nobody wants a D player. So we shuffle the C players like cards when transfers come out. And if you're a smart officer, unfortunately, what you will do is, if you educate your people well in advance, that if transfers come up and somebody needs a strong player, I'm going to offer one of you guys up, because you got leadership potential and you can go in here, you can make a definitive change. I'm not going to always protect all my A and B players. The other thing as an officer or as an organization, you got to realize that just about the time your company is operating at peak potential, or your organization, and everybody knows everything, and you're operating, you don't even have to talk. Things just click like this. Stand by. It's getting ready to change. You're getting ready to lose people to retirement or transfers or something. And you're going to go from a high operational tone to you're going to have to restart your team building again. So, yeah, we all want A and B players. We don't want D players. F players shouldn't even exist. But we inherit a few of them. But, if you talent scout, you can bring your C players up to Bs, and sometimes A, because if you give them something they're passionate about and that they're jazzed and they're good about, and you give them the tools and you water the seed, they're going to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, we just went to a 3-year bid because I think when we were doing 2-year bid, like you said, you don't have enough time to really form as a team, even in that 2 years. And we're still another department close to us. They do lifetime bid. I don't want that. That's really forming the team for too long. But you definitely you have to look at the cycles of that. And we also know that the tough thing about the C players, because they just want to do the bare minimum, unfortunately, they will bid with a captain that is also a C, or maybe even, and it brings those C players even down to a D a lot of times, because those company officers are at that level too.
Ugly parents attract ugly kids, and vice versa. And that's the problem with the bid system. I fully understand union. I've been in negotiation, but we're a right to work state, and that's one of the difficulties of having a union that allows you to bid a lifetime station. On the other hand, if I have a D player, let's say City of Virginia Beach, so I got 3 shifts, I got 24 stations, and I can literally, and if your career is 25 years and 50, I could literally transfer you every year to a different station, and you would never make every station, and you'd have your whole career, and you'd never have to come up to par, and everybody would have to like suffer a little bit of uh, uh, D player mentality, and then I could move you somewhere. I could hide you in the organization forever, but we don't need to hide people. What we need to do is hold people accountable and responsible, set an expectation. And if you've got a whole, the thing about the bidding system is if you've got a whole series of C players, there's really nothing you can do about it. I mean, you can't go in and require them. But if you got D players, that battalion officer ought to be camped out on somebody, unless they're a D player too. And
Well,
sometimes if you can't change people, you got to change people.
yeah. Well, we've talked about it before, like the burnout, like the fixer, right? They always want to send them to that company officer, and then he just continues to deal with just the D's and unfortunately sometimes the F's, because it's like, well, send him to Jesse. He's gonna try to fix them, and the big thing about it is when you start looking at the process of that, as a company officer, yeah, not only the burnout, but it also just brings you down too, if that's all you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that, again, this goes right back to training. We got to teach our officers how to identify and how to manage a D employee, and that's a fix it or fire it. And I tell people, I say, next to the death of a firefighter, you're never going to be more miserable or more sad when you're trying to fix a D player, because it takes about a year. You got to be spot on policy. You got to deal with the unions. You got to do all this stuff without violating their personal rights, and you got to do it right. And it takes an organization to fire an idiot, a single person. We tend, just like you said, we take Jesse, he's the fixer. We send him a D player, which is no different than putting you in a life raft and shoving you out to sea on your own and saying, come back when you figure it out. It takes the company officer. It takes the shift, because while you're doing that, the entire shift has to pick up the slack because you're supervising and trying to track knucklehead. You got to write a performance plan for them. You got to track them. You got to document it. Then you got to have your battalion chief involved. You got to have your division chief and fire chief. You probably have to have human resources. You probably have to have legal involved, because there's going to be times when you're going to have to go to them. And make no mistake about it, these D players, they know policy and what they can get away with better than you ever will, because that's where they live. They live on that razor's edge, and the only way they survive is by knowing what the Al Capone. They know what the technicalities are, and they know how to skirt out of stuff. And the minute you violate anything, you've lost it. And you don't want to go through a year of this stuff and then lose the opportunity to either fix that or fire it. And certainly the best thing to do is to fix it. But some people just, they need to go be making bagels for a living or learn how to say, do you want fries with that?
Well, even especially when you start talking about probationary firefighters, I mean, that's the time to try to figure that out. You figure this 365 days, this year that they're on probation, this is the best they're ever going to be. And it's funny when we do like oral interviews for captain, and we ask them, like, what is your role with a probationary firefighter? And a lot of these guys say, well, my role in that is to get them to pass probation. And I said, no, your goal is to help them along and direct them towards passing probation, but it's also your role to let them go if they're not meeting the standards, expectations, culture, whatever. I mean, that's the time to do that, right? So
absolutely, 100%, absolutely. Most of I'm watching guys' head, but most of the people that we end up with D players, we inherited. I mean, look, if you get into a system that's as large as New York City or LA County or LA City or, some of these thousand people departments, it's inevitable. They're a cross section of the population. You're going to have some D players. What you don't want to do is end up with them all in the same site. And the organization, you got to figure out how to do that. You got to figure out how to work with the union and blah, 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 blah. But I mean, probationary period is the time to figure this out. Now, people change over time, priorities change, personalities change. They go through personal changes in their life, good and bad, which can change who they are with regards to their work ethic. But you're exactly right. And, it's just like we don't educate. One of the biggest things I think we don't educate our people about when they first day they sit in rookie school is to explain to them what their entitlements are and what their entitlements aren't. I mean, you're not entitled to work the same place. You work for the organization. So you're not entitled to work in the same place your whole career. If you have a skill and I come to you and I go, I need you in fire inspections, guess what? You're going to fire inspections. You work for the organization. You're entitled to a safe working environment, good gear, good policies, good leadership, good health care, good retirement. Those are the kinds of things you're entitled to, but you're not entitled to certain things within the organization because you work for the organization. You don't work for Station 2.
Right. Well, and one of the probationaries that you talk about in the book is Hoover, right?
God. Yeah. Well, we were a combination volunteer career system for a while. We hired a guy. And the way he got his nickname Hoover was we have right down from the station he was a volunteer at, we have a Krispy Kreme. And if you ever notice, when you go in early in the morning to Krispy Kreme, those things are coming right out of the oven and they're still hot and they're still rising. The yeast is still rising in them. And this guy literally ate 24 donuts in about 3 minutes and expanded and compressed his inferior vena cava. And he had a syncopal episode that pumped his stomach. So he gets his name Hoover. So he gets hired as a career guy, comes to me at Fire Station 3, which was busy place. I mean, lots of extrications, lots of, trauma, lots of fires. And, we had a call one day where a guy got his head just lopped off in the car, and we're trying to extricate this guy. And I'm looking around, I'm like, where is Hoover? And and my master firefighter said, I think he's sitting on the tailboard, and he's sitting on the tailboard and he's just like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I went, okay, off the EAP you go, and got him back about 4 weeks later, and one of my master firefighters did something that would probably get you fired today. We had a fire stick. You walked in the bay and you turn right. And the minute you come in the right door, you're in the kitchen. There's this big, long kitchen table. And Hoover's his first shift back. He's reading the newspaper. My master firefighter went over and got a pig's brain and walked in and said, hey, Hoover, heads up, and hit the table with this thing. It slid right down the table and dropped in his lap. And he went, oh, another 4 weeks at EAP. So that would get you fired today. But yeah, I mean, some people, they're just, and hopefully you find this out, some people aren't cut out for this. Okay. Some people can do fine on the fire, but they're not real good on the EMS. Some people are really good on EMS and aren't real keen about going into a building or a basement while it's roaring. So, I mean, you're exactly right. The time to figure that out is in rookie school. Really in rookie school, even before they hit probation, and then use that year-long probation as a buffer to further evaluate them in the real world. There's a difference between shooting on the range and getting shot at. I found that out when I went to Afghanistan. I was good and I did a lot of shooting on the range, but the first time rounds were coming in and they were pinging and cracking by my head. That's a totally different thing. So the burn building is completely different than going into a basement that's roaring up at you, or a high rise that's roaring at you at 2 a.m.
Yeah. Well, that leads us to another portion of that book where you start talking about battlefield firefighting, right? And you kind of started playing around with this as a class now. I kind of saw it out in Virginia and all that, right? But what's some of the stuff you talk about in that chapter with battlefield?
So I started looking at our mentality, our general mentality across the board about how we teach tactics and strategy. And we do a pretty good job about it in instant command. I mean, geez, I was thinking the other day when I first came to fire service, there wasn't any instant command. I'm wondering how we did it. It's so ancient to me. I can't remember how we did it without instant command. But so I started looking at people like Clausewitz and General A.M. Gray, who wrote the Marine Corps handbook, and Sun Tzu, and a lot of tacticians and warriors over time. And I looked at it and I said, you know what? The fire scene or the EMS scene or the rescue scene is not a mindless, manipulative, a mindless environment or opponent that we can manipulate. We can manipulate it because the war is you trying to impose your will on me and me trying to impose my will on you, and that's what the fire ground's all about. So I said, we need to start thinking about the fire or the rescue ground as a living, breathing, aggressive opponent who's able to throw resources at you and has one intent: to kill or hurt you. And by example, fire, you let it double and it's going to consume more fuel. It's going to get more intense and it's going to come after you. And so if you don't knock that fire down, if you don't get in the right place at the right time with the right hose, that mindless creature is coming after you. It's going to get bigger. It's going to throw more resources at you. It's like it's going to dump another 2 or 3 platoons on it and it's going to overwhelm you. And so I started looking at all this stuff like the fog of war and how do we get human deprivation on the scene, and how do we psychologically impact our people. And if you look at it from a combat perspective and you say, stop looking at the fireground as a static event that you're controlling, because you're not. Start looking at it as an intelligent combatant that is willing to do everything it can to hurt or kill you. And then we talk about all those aspects, just like you're trying to hurt or kill it. And if you think about that, you're going to change the way you look at it. You're going to change your tactics. And when things go right or wrong, you're going to have a better understanding of why that occurred.
Yeah, no, it's been great stuff, like going through that. I saw it, like I said, at the battlefield class, and looking at some of that military doctrine, because you got sucked into that world for quite some time, right?
Yeah, about 6 years. Yeah, 6, 7 years. And working for a couple of different organizations, and I started out with diplomatic security, and then went to work for somebody else. So I've never been a soldier. I've never been, pushing through a field in Baghdad, on a platoon. But I have been in those environments, and I have been shot at, and I've been in some firefights in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it's interesting. It's a different world, but yeah, the fire service is just like the military when we get into combat. We're throwing resources at it. We're trying to push personnel and technology to crush an opponent, and that opponent's trying to crush us. And the sooner we realize that, the better off we're going to be and the more lives we're going to save.
Yeah, so somewhere along the line, I went off track. I was looking to doing battlefield at the end here somewhere, but we kind of went that direction. So let's talk about the bank account, right? We talked a lot about like knowing our people, knowing ourselves, and there's some stuff where you talk about drawing from the bank account, depositing into the bank account as far as your people.
So Stephen Covey has a theory that you have an emotional bank account, and every day you're leading, you're making deposits into people's emotional bank account. Because eventually you're going to have to make a withdrawal. So what does that mean? Well, it comes down functionally to humanistically helping your people. And if you help them with small things, they're more willing to trust you for big things. And they're also more willing when you have to say no, because you're not going to be able to say yes all the time. They're more willing to trust you and accept that no. So, if you can help your people with small things like getting leave when they need to get it, by getting training that they need to get or that they really want, by giving them the opportunity to grow and talent scouting them and letting them express their talents and use their talents to the good, to help them reach where they want to be in the organization, to make sure that you understand that they have a family and that those issues drive them sometimes, and to make them understand that this isn't just a rigid organization, that we got it, they're a human being, and that, they have all these pressures on them like we all do that come into us as humans every single day. Every day you help somebody, every day you tell somebody they did a great job, every time you can help one of your members with an issue, or get them something that they need, or help them find a path to be successful, you're making deposits in that emotional bank account, and they're thankful for it. I mean, I got a boss right now that I work for who's the head PA, who's former Navy IDC, and he's on the security detail with me, and he does that for everybody. And I've got a doc that sort of coordinates the PAs. They make deposits in our emotional bank account every day. So when they have to tell me no, or this ain't going to happen, I trust them that they tried and that they did the right thing and it just didn't work out, but that they've been standing out there slugging for me. And so every day you do something good for your people, you're making deposits in their emotional bank account, because eventually you're going to have to make a withdrawal, and I think it's just a good way to go about business. You do the same thing with your kids, and that's what you do. You make deposits in their emotional bank account every day. get them to the sports, you give them the right food, you let them play, you buy them presents, you ask them, what do you want to do? You want to take a walk today? You want to read a book? Whatever it is. So your kids trust you, so that when you have to discipline them or say no, most of the time they understand.
Well, I glad you could come on here and I can make a withdrawal from you today to hang out with me for an hour. All it took was a t-shirt sent out to you. Maybe that's quid pro quo, but yeah.
I fight fire because the voices in my head tell me.
Well, it's great to hang out with you. Give me one last thing. Like I mean, I kind of brought up Hoover as one of my favorite stories in there, especially when your engineer or your driver looked at you, said, "What are you going to do now, Mr. Paramedic Man?" When you ripped his entire tongue out of his face. But
yeah. So I put the tongue back in. So here's the thing I'd leave you with, and Ray Downey and I were out running one day in Northern Virginia. It was cold, man. We were at a FEMA meeting, and we were just talking about career and life, and he was a quality human being. I mean, he was like one of the guys I always wanted to be, but was never good enough to be. There's a bunch of people like that in my life. And when he came back, he said, Chase, at the end of your career and at the end of your life, you only leave behind what you leave behind. There won't be a statue in the town square. And that sort of pissed me off, because when I retired, I drove all over the city, and he's right, there ain't no statue in the city. I'm angry. But it took me a while to realize that really there are statues to you. Every person that you raise, every person that goes after you, every person that you help to get somewhere in the organization, you don't realize it, but you got hundreds of statues running around right now that are a tribute to what you did and what God did and what Bruno did, Mike McGroarty, and all the people who have come before us. We're statues that reflect what they left behind. And so 25 years and 50 comes quick. And in the end, believe me, that organization was there long before you got there and I got there, and it's going to keep going long after we're gone. And it's not going to falter, and it's not going to stop because Chase or Jesse or Guy leave. But what you can do every day you go to work, you can make it better than it was the day you leave. And every day you go to work, you can make it better the next day and the next day. Raise the kids, talent scout. Don't be an ugly parent. Give people the opportunity to raise up, and don't expect them to be who you are, because it took us a long time to get where we are. You do that, and you're going to be successful, and then they're going to be successful. And in the end, that's all you can do. You raise the kids, you send your kids. I mean, when my son went to college, he was driving off, and I'm standing in the front yard going, "No, you can't go yet. There's more. There's so much more. You just can't go right now." So I think in the end, leave behind what you leave behind, and be a steward, and raise the kids.
Well, once again, I appreciate hanging out with you. I don't know if this is as fun as the ice cream show, driving around in a cool rig and getting ice cream, but still good hanging out with you virtually. And once again, thanks for doing the forward for my book that'll hopefully come out soon, so we can do this again later on, and you can interview me next time or something, and we'll make it happen.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor. Guy, it was such a thrill to see you again, man. It's been so long.
Absolutely. I do have one thing. Chief Mike McGroarty once told me when we were first starting out, leave your ego at the door and your talents will come out and they'll come to you. Firehouse culture has changed with so much with these younger guys, and that they know everything. As a mentor to so many, what is the one thing to tell them that will stick with them for the rest of their career?
And you have no idea what that'll be until 10 years later when they tell you.
Right.
Great point. Mike was a great man, still is.
Guy, I think there was a question there for Chase, was there?
Yeah, that one thing that will stick with a junior fireman for the rest of their career. Like, I remember when Mike sat me down and told me that, leave your ego at the door. Do you have I don't know if it's a cliche, but an actual phrase that you tell your guys?
Yeah, I'm trying. I mean, I've got several, obviously, because I'm just that way. But I think the big one is open your ears, learn every single day, and then pass it on and mentor up. Teach up, teach down. I always said, 2 down, 1 up. In other words, learn the job of everybody below you, 2 levels below you, and learn the job of everybody above you, 1 up. So 2 down, 1 up. But I don't think it can be any better put than what Mike said. Leave your ego at the door and the rest will come to you.
Cool. So we'll wrap up meeting wise, and then if you guys have anything else, Mike, how's it going? Welcome again. You got anything?
Thanks, Jesse. No, just can't say enough to Chase for everything that's putting the book out and spending the many years sharing everything he shared, because I'm sure he knows it, but if he doesn't, obviously tremendous impact in the fire service at many levels all over the place. So thanks, Chase. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, sir. It's a big love fest.
Well, I love you, buddy.
Hey, I really appreciate the opportunity. And again, it's great to see you guys. I hope to see you soon out on the left coast.